You wanted proof? I collected it against you.
The basement smelled like burnt wire and broken promises. I crouched next to the fuse box, flashlight between my teeth, replacing the blown 30-amp breaker that had ended power to half our house. Again. Third time this month, which was funny because I owned Parish Electrical, the biggest contractor in upstate New York, and my own house had wiring issues. Funny wasn't the right word. Ironic was closer. Messed up was perfect. The front door slammed upstairs. Beth was home from another one of her late meetings with her boss, Greg Stanton. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. Either they were discussing quarterly reports over wine, or my wife was screwing her way up the corporate ladder at Stanton and Associates. Given that her lipstick was always smudged when she got home, I was betting on door number 2. Jay? Her voice echoed down the basement stairs, slurred just enough to confirm she'd been drinking. Why are the lights out? Power surge, I called back, flipping the new breaker. The basement fluorescence flickered to life. Fixed it. I climbed the stairs to find Beth in our kitchen, still wearing her business suit, but with her blouse buttoned wrong and her hair looking like she'd been wrestling. She froze when she saw me, probably because she'd expected me to be asleep. You're up late, she said, trying to sound casual. So are you. How was the meeting? Beth opened the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of water, not meeting my eyes. Long. Greg wanted to go over the Henderson project timeline. Until midnight. We lost track of time. I leaned against the counter, studying my wife of 12 years. Beth had always been beautiful in that polished, corporate way. Blonde hair, always perfect, makeup always flawless, clothes always expensive. Tonight, she looked like she'd been tumbled in a dryer. Must have been some timeline, I said. She finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not guilt, not shame, something worse, confidence. Actually, Jay, we need to talk. About what? Beth set down her water bottle and straightened her shoulders. When she spoke, her voice was steady and cold. I'm sleeping with Greg. Have been for 6 months, and before you start making threats about divorce lawyers or whatever pathetic revenge you're planning, you should know something. She smiled, and it was the cruelest expression I'd ever seen. Greg's not just my boss. He's your biggest competitor, and thanks to information I've been feeding him about Parish Electrical's bids and client lists, Stanton and Associates is about to crush you. I stared at her. In 12 years of marriage, through fights about money and kids we never had and her drinking and my workaholic tendencies, I'd never seen this version of Beth, this cold, calculating stranger wearing my wife's face. You've been feeding him inside information? Every bid, every client meeting, every weakness in your operation. Greg knows more about Parish Electrical than you do. She laughed, actually laughed. Did you really think I married you for love, Jay? You were a meal ticket, a way out of my parents' debt. But Greg can give me more than you ever could. The words hit like a punch to the gut, but I kept my expression neutral. 12 years in the electrical business had taught me to keep my emotions in check when dealing with difficult clients. Apparently, that included difficult wives. So what's the plan? I asked. You divorce me, take half of everything, and ride off into the sunset with Greg? Better than that. Greg's been documenting safety violations at your job sites. OSHA complaints, worker injury reports, code violations, all fabricated, but they look real. By the time the investigations are finished, Parish Electrical will be bankrupt and you'll be facing criminal charges. Beth moved closer, and I could smell Greg's cologne on her clothes. But here's my favorite part, she continued. Greg's already lined up buyers for your equipment and client contracts. We'll purchase them through a shell company for pennies on the dollar. So technically, I'll still own everything you built. I'll just own it with Greg instead of you. I nodded slowly, as if I was processing this information for the first time. That's quite a plan, I said. It's foolproof. There's just one problem. Beth raised an eyebrow. What's that? I pulled her phone out of my back pocket. The iPhone she'd left on the kitchen counter when she went upstairs to change clothes 3 nights ago. The one she'd forgotten about because she'd been too drunk to remember where she'd left it. You left this downstairs Tuesday night, I said, holding up the device. Took me a while to crack your passcode, but Greg Stanton's 69 wasn't exactly Fort Knox. The color drained from Beth's face. 6 months of text messages, I continued. Photos, voicemails, including some very detailed discussions about falsifying OSHA reports and stealing my client list. Also some pictures I'm pretty sure Greg's wife wouldn't appreciate. Beth lunged for the phone, but I pulled it back. Don't worry, I made copies. Cloud storage is a wonderful thing. You can't use those. They're private communications. Actually, they're evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, theft of trade secrets, and about a dozen other felonies. My lawyer was very interested when I showed them to him yesterday. Beth stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You knew? This whole time you knew? I'm not stupid, Beth. You've been obvious about it for months. The late meetings, the new clothes, the way you started asking detailed questions about my business. I just wanted to see how far you'd go. Then why didn't you stop me? I smiled, and I made sure it was just as cold as hers had been. Because I wanted you to hang yourself, and Greg too. See, while you two were busy playing corporate spy games, I've been preparing my own surprise. I walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Divorce papers, already filed. Asset freeze, already in effect. Restraining order against you and Greg accessing any parish electrical properties or accounts. I set the folder on the counter. Oh, and I've already called Greg's wife. Turns out she hired a private investigator 6 months ago because she suspected he was cheating. She's got photos of you two at the Marriott. Beth grabbed the folder with shaking hands. You can't do this. I already did. You'll be served officially tomorrow, but I thought you should know tonight. Professional courtesy. Greg will destroy you. He has connections, lawyers. Greg's about to be destroyed himself. See, while you were feeding him information about my company, I was feeding you false information to pass along. Those bids he's been undercutting, they were fake. The real bids were 20% lower. Stanton and Associates has been losing money on every job they've stolen from me. I opened the refrigerator and grabbed a beer, popping it open with satisfaction. Greg's company is hemorrhaging cash, his wife is divorcing him, and tomorrow morning the FBI will be investigating him for corporate espionage. Turns out stealing trade secrets is a federal crime. Beth sank into a kitchen chair, the folder falling from her hands. This is impossible. You're not this smart. That's where you're wrong, sweetheart. I'm exactly this smart. I just let you think I wasn't because it served my purposes. I took a long drink of beer and looked at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, sitting in my kitchen in her wrinkled suit and smeared makeup. You know what the best part is? You're right that you married me for money, but you forgot something important. What? I didn't get rich by being stupid. I got rich by being smarter than people who underestimate me. Beth looked up at me with tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. You bastard. Maybe. But I'm a bastard who's about to own everything while you and Greg are explaining yourselves to federal prosecutors. I finished my beer and set the empty bottle on the counter. You should pack a bag. The restraining order takes effect at midnight and it's 11:58. Beth stood up, her hands clenched into fists. This isn't over. Yeah, it is! She stormed toward the stairs, then turned back. Greg won't go down easy. He'll fight this. I smiled one more time. I'm counting on it. The next morning started with my phone ringing at 6 a.m. Carl Hendricks, my site foreman and oldest friend, sounded like he'd been awake all night. Boss, we got problems. Someone called OSHA on the Riverside project. They're here with clipboards and attitudes. I was already getting dressed. What kind of violations? The made-up kind. They're claiming we don't have proper fall protection on the scaffold work, but I got photos from yesterday showing every safety line in place. I'll be there in 20 minutes. There's more. Channel 8 News is here too. Someone tipped them off that Parish Electrical was under investigation. I grabbed my keys and headed for the truck. Beth's car was gone from the driveway. She'd left sometime during the night, probably to Greg's place. Fine by me. The Riverside construction site looked like a crime scene. 2 OSHA inspectors were measuring scaffold heights while a news crew filmed everything. Carl met me at the gate, his weathered face grim. This is BS, Jay. We passed inspection on this site 2 days ago. Now they're saying our electrical boxes are installed wrong. I looked at the setup. Everything was perfect, exactly to code. But the inspectors were taking photos of violations that didn't exist. Who called it in? Anonymous tip, but the complaint was detailed. Whoever made it knew our work schedule and specific installation locations. Greg Stanton. Had to be. Beth had given him inside information about our job sites, and now he was using it to manufacture safety violations. The news crew was just icing on the cake, public humiliation to go with the legal problems. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is just the beginning, we'll see, G. I showed the message to Carl, who spat in the dirt. Want me to go have a conversation with Mr. Stanton? Not yet. Let's see how this plays out. The OSHA inspection took 3 hours. In the end, they found 2 minor violations: a missing safety sticker on one electrical panel and a scaffold that was 6 inches higher than regulation. Normally, that would mean a small fine and a correction notice, but the news crew made it look like we were running a death trap. I was giving a statement to the reporter when my lawyer called. "Jay, we have a problem. Beth filed a countersuit this morning. She's claiming you've been physically harmful and that the evidence you collected was obtained illegally." "That's ridiculous." "Maybe, but she's got Greg Stanton backing up her story. He's claiming you threatened him at a job site last month." I remembered the incident. Greg had shown up at one of our projects, supposedly to inspect work his company was bidding against. I'd told him to leave, firmly, but I hadn't threatened him. He's lying. Probably, but he's got witnesses, 2 of his employees who say they heard you make threats. I finished the news interview and drove back to Parish Electrical headquarters. Our office was in a converted warehouse on the industrial side of town. Not fancy, but functional. My secretary, Maria Santos, met me at the door with a stack of phone messages. Half are from reporters wanting statements about the OSHA thing. The other half are clients asking if they should be worried about their projects. I flipped through the messages. 3 clients had already called to postpone upcoming work. Greg's plan was working. "Get me a meeting with our insurance company and call that private investigator we used for the workers' comp fraud case last year. I need surveillance on Greg Stanton." "Already on it." "But Jay, there's something else." Maria led me to my office, where she'd laid out a series of photographs on my desk. "Mrs. Howland from next door to your house dropped these off this morning. She's been taking pictures of everyone who comes and goes from your place." Mrs. Howland was 75 years old and nosier than a bloodhound. Normally, I found her annoying. Today, she was my guardian angel. The photos showed Beth and Greg entering my house together on multiple occasions over the past 3 months, always when my truck wasn't in the driveway, always carrying briefcases or folders. She said she thought it was suspicious that Beth was bringing work home so often, especially with a man who wasn't her husband. I studied the photos. In one, Greg was clearly visible carrying what looked like Parish Electrical project folders. In another, Beth was handing him a stack of papers in my driveway. Mrs. Howland said she'd be happy to testify if needed. She doesn't like Beth much. Why not? Beth told her to mind her own business when she asked about the late-night visitors. Mrs. Howland doesn't forget things like that. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Greg Stanton's office number. Parish Electrical. "Jay, it's Greg. I think we need to talk." His voice was smooth, confident. The voice of a man who thought he was winning. "About what?" "About ending this situation before it gets out of hand. Beth told me about your conversation last night. I think there might be room for a reasonable settlement." "What kind of settlement?" "You drop the criminal charges. We'll make sure the OSHA investigation goes away. Beth gets a fair divorce settlement, and we all move on with our lives." I leaned back in my chair. "That's generous of you." "I'm a reasonable man. What's your definition of a fair settlement?" "Beth gets the house and half the business assets. You keep operational control of Parish Electrical, but she becomes a silent partner. So she gets paid for the rest of her life for screwing you." That's crude, but essentially accurate. I looked at the photos spread across my desk, Greg and Beth stealing my business secrets in my own driveway. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. The OSHA investigation is just the beginning. I have other resources. I'm sure you do. We could be partners instead of enemies, Jay. Parish Electrical and Stanton and Associates could dominate the regional market. Under your control, you mean? Under joint control. I'm not greedy. I almost laughed. Greg Stanton was many things, but not greedy wasn't one of them. I'll get back to you. Soon, I hope. It would be unfortunate if more safety violations were discovered at your job sites. The threat was barely veiled. Greg was telling me he could manufacture problems faster than I could solve them. I understand. Good, I'll wait for your call. I hung up and looked at Carl, who'd been listening to my side of the conversation. So, what's the play, boss? We're going to give Greg exactly what he's asking for. You're going to settle? No, I'm going to let him think I'm going to settle. Meanwhile, we're going to document every threat, every manufactured violation, and every illegal move he makes. I picked up one of Mrs. Howland's photos, a clear shot of Greg leaving my house with a Parish Electrical project folder under his arm. Greg thinks he's playing chess, but he's actually playing checkers, and I'm about to show him the difference. Carl grinned. What do you need me to do? Remember that security camera system we installed at the Henderson project? The one with the motion sensors and night vision? Yeah. I want you to install the same system at every one of our active job sites. Hidden cameras, audio recording, the works. If Greg or any of his people show up to plant evidence or cause problems, I want it documented. That's going to be expensive. Not as expensive as losing our business license. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking our equipment yard. 20 trucks, $500,000 in electrical supplies, and 37 employees who depended on Parish Electrical for their livelihoods. Greg made one mistake, I said. What's that? He assumed I'd fight fair. The call came at 2 a.m. 3 days later. Carl's voice was tight with anger. They hit the Morrison site, cut through the fence, trashed the electrical panels we installed yesterday, and spray-painted unsafe work on the trailer. I was already reaching for my clothes. How much damage? 15,000, maybe 20. But that's not the worst part. They left evidence. What kind of evidence? The kind that makes it look like we cut corners on the installation, removed safety grounds, bypassed circuit breakers, disabled GFCI outlets. If OSHA sees this, we're done. I drove to the Morrison site in record time. It was a new office complex on the north side of town, our biggest project of the year. The vandalism was professional, not random destruction, but calculated sabotage designed to look like negligent electrical work. Carl met me at the trailer with a thermos of coffee and a grim expression. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They made it look like we installed everything wrong, then tried to cover it up. I examined the damaged panels. The work was too sophisticated for random vandals. Someone with electrical knowledge had systematically created code violations that would be discovered during the next inspection. Any witnesses? Security guard says he didn't see anything, but I found this. Carl handed me a business card that had been dropped near the fence. Stanton and Associates, Greg's company. Could be planted, I said. Could be, but the security camera caught something interesting. We walked to the guard shack where the overnight security guard, a retired cop named Murphy, was reviewing footage on a small monitor. Here's the good part, Murphy said, queuing up a video file. 3 guys, dark clothes, knew exactly where the cameras were positioned. They avoided the main angles, but they didn't know about the backup camera on the crane. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. 3 men in dark clothing moving with purpose through the construction site. One of them was tall and lean, moving with the confident stride I'd seen 100 times. Greg Stanton. Can you enhance this? Already did. Want to see the money shot? Murphy switched to a different camera angle. This one showed Greg's face clearly as he directed the other 2 men toward the electrical panels. Son of a witch was stupid enough to show his face. Gets better, Carl said. I called my buddy at the phone company. They can track cell tower pings. If Greg's phone was here at 2 a.m., we can prove it. I studied the video footage. Greg had made a critical error. He'd assumed the security cameras were the only surveillance. He hadn't counted on construction equipment having its own recording systems. Murphy, can you make copies of this? Already done. But there's something else you should know. Murphy switched to live footage from the main gate camera. A news van was pulling into the parking lot. Anonymous tip called in about safety violations at the Morrison site. Channel 8 will be here in 10 minutes. Greg's plan was becoming clear. Sabotage the work, plant evidence of code violations, then tip off the media for maximum public embarrassment. By the time the truth came out, Parish Electrical's reputation would be destroyed. Carl, get on the radio. I want every available electrician here in 30 minutes. We're going to fix this mess before the news crew gets set up. Boss, there's no way we can repair 15 grand worth of damage in half an hour. We're not going to repair it. We're going to document it. I called my lawyer from the truck. Richard, I need you at the Morrison construction site immediately. Bring a court reporter and a video camera. We're going to document vandalism and file criminal charges. At 2:30 in the morning? Greg Stanton just made the mistake of his life. I want everything legal and airtight before the sun comes up. By the time the news crew arrived, we were ready. Richard had documented every piece of sabotage with photographs and video. The court reporter had taken sworn statements from Murphy and 2 other witnesses, and I had copies of the security footage showing Greg's involvement. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Chen, approached with her cameraman in tow. Mr. Parrish, We've received reports of serious safety violations at this construction site. Would you care to comment? Absolutely. We discovered vandalism and sabotage at this site early this morning. The damage was designed to create the appearance of safety violations, but as you can see from our documentation, this was deliberate destruction of properly installed electrical systems. I handed her a folder containing photos of the damage and copies of the security footage. We have video evidence showing who was responsible for this vandalism, and we're filing criminal charges this morning. Jessica flipped through the documentation, her expression changing from skepticism to interest. This footage shows Greg Stanton of Stanton & Associates. Are you claiming he was involved in vandalizing your worksite? I'm not claiming anything. The video speaks for itself. Why would a competitor resort to sabotage? That's a question you should ask Mr. Stanton. The interview lasted 20 minutes. By the end, Jessica had enough material for a very different story than the one Greg had planned. Instead of Parish Electrical being investigated for safety violations, Stanton & Associates was going to be investigated for corporate sabotage. My phone rang as the news crew was packing up. Greg Stanton, right on schedule. You're making a big mistake, Jay. Am I? That security footage won't hold up in court. My lawyers will tear it apart. Maybe, but it'll hold up in the court of public opinion. Channel 8 is running the story on the morning news. Silence on the other end of the line. You want to play hardball? Greg's voice had lost its smooth confidence. I can destroy you. One phone call to the state licensing board and Parish Electrical is finished. Go ahead, make the call. You think I'm bluffing? I think you're desperate. And desperate men make stupid mistakes. I hung up and looked at Carl, who was grinning like a wolf. Think he'll back down? No, he's in too deep now. Greg's got his reputation and his business on the line. He can't afford to lose to someone he considers beneath him. So what's next? I looked at the Morrison site, where my crew was already starting repairs on the vandalized equipment. 37 employees counting on me to keep Parish Electrical running, a dozen major projects that would be completed on time and under budget, assuming Greg didn't sabotage them too. Next, we give Greg enough rope to hang himself. How? By letting him think he's winning. Greg's counterattack came 48 hours later, and it was more sophisticated than I'd expected. Instead of more obvious sabotage, he went after our reputation through official channels. The State Electrical Licensing Board received an anonymous complaint alleging that Parish Electrical had been falsifying inspection reports for the past 2 years. The complaint included detailed documentation, project numbers, dates, inspector signatures, and photographs of allegedly substandard work. The documentation was impressive. It was also completely fabricated. They're good, my lawyer Richard admitted as we reviewed the complaint in my office. Whoever put this together had access to your project files and knew enough about electrical codes to make the violations look realistic. Beth, I said, she had access to everything. Can you prove that? I pulled out the folder of photographs Mrs. Howland had provided. She was in my house with Greg multiple times, carrying Parish Electrical files. That proves access, but not that she created false documents. Richard was right. I needed more than circumstantial evidence to prove Beth and Greg had manufactured the licensing complaint. What's the timeline on this? The board will launch a formal investigation within a week. If they find merit in the complaint, they can suspend your license pending a full review. How long for a full review? 6 months, maybe longer. 6 months without a license meant 6 months without work. Parish Electrical would be bankrupt in 60 days. My phone buzzed with a text message from Beth. Still think you're smarter than everyone else? I showed the message to Richard, who frowned. That's not very smart of her. Looks like she's admitting involvement. Beth was never as clever as she thought she was. She just married someone she assumed was stupider. I forwarded Beth's text to my private investigator, along with instructions to document everything. Then I called Carl. I need you to pull all the inspection reports for every project mentioned in that licensing complaint. All of them? That's like 50 projects over 2 years? All of them. And I want the original inspector signatures verified. If someone forged inspection documents, there will be inconsistencies. What about the photos? They show electrical work that looks pretty bad. The photos are real. The locations are fake. Carl was quiet for a moment. You think they took pictures of bad electrical work at other sites and claimed it was ours? I think they're not as smart as they think they are. I spent the next 3 days playing defense while Carl and Maria worked on documenting our inspection records. The licensing board investigation was moving forward. 2 more clients had canceled projects, and the local newspaper ran a follow-up story about ongoing safety concerns at Parish Electrical. But I wasn't just playing defense. I was also setting a trap. The trap was simple. I leaked false information to Beth through a source she'd trust completely. Her sister Jennifer worked as a bookkeeper for one of our subcontractors. Jennifer had always disliked me, so when she called Beth to report concerning financial irregularities at Parish Electrical, Beth believed every word. The irregularities were fictional, but they painted a picture of a company in serious financial trouble. According to Jennifer's inside information, Parish Electrical was behind on payments to suppliers, facing multiple lawsuits and desperately trying to hide cash flow problems. I knew Beth would pass this information to Greg, and Greg would act on it. He did, faster than I'd expected. Greg called an emergency meeting with our 3 biggest clients, claiming he had insider information about Parish Electrical's financial instability. He offered to take over their projects at cost, positioning himself as the white knight, saving them from a contractor who might not be able to complete their work. It was a good strategy. It would have worked perfectly if the financial problems had been real. But since the information was false, Greg had just committed fraud by making material misrepresentations to induce contract violations. I knew about the client meetings because one of the clients, Jim Morrison of Morrison Development, called me immediately afterward. "Jay, I just had the strangest conversation with Greg Stanton. He's claiming your company is about to go bankrupt and offering to take over our project." "What did you tell him?" "I told him he was full of crap. Parish Electrical's payments are always on time, and your bonding company confirmed your financial status last month." Morrison was a good client and a straight shooter. He'd been in construction for 30 years and could spot a con artist from across the room. "Did Greg show you any documentation?" "He had financial statements that supposedly came from your company, showed significant losses and cash flow problems." "Can you fax me copies?" "Already done." "Jay, I don't know where he got these numbers, but they're not consistent with the payments and performance I've seen from Parish Electrical." The faxed documents were sophisticated forgeries. Someone had created fake Parish Electrical financial statements showing exactly the problems Jennifer had described to Beth. The numbers were wrong, but the format and layout were perfect copies of our actual statements. Only someone with access to our real financial records could have created such accurate forgeries. I called my accountant. "Tom, I need you to review our computer security. Someone's been accessing our financial files." "That's impossible. All our records are password protected and encrypted." "Someone created fake financial statements using our exact format and account numbers." Tom was quiet for a moment. "I'll check the access logs. But Jay, the only people with passwords for the financial system are you, me, and Maria." "What about backup access?" "There's an emergency access code, but only 3 people have it." "Who?" "You, me, and Beth. We set it up 2 years ago in case something happened to you and the company needed emergency access to financial records." "Beth. She'd used her emergency access to steal our financial data, then worked with Greg to create forgeries designed to destroy our client relationships." "Tom, I want you to change all the passwords immediately, and I want a complete audit of who accessed what files and when." "I can have that for you by tomorrow morning." "Make it tonight." I hung up and looked at the forged financial statements spread across my desk. Greg and Beth had made another mistake. They'd assumed I wouldn't discover their client meetings quickly enough to respond. But they'd forgotten that I'd been in business for 15 years, and I'd built relationships with clients based on trust and performance. Jim Morrison wasn't the only one who'd called to warn me about Greg's claims. By the end of the day, I'd heard from all 3 clients Greg had approached. None of them believed his story, and all of them were angry about his attempt to interfere with their projects. Better yet, I now had documentation of Greg making false statements about Parish Electrical's financial condition to induce contract violations. That was fraud, conspiracy, and tortious interference with business relationships. My phone rang at 9 p.m. Beth calling from Greg's number. "You son of a witch. Good evening to you too, sweetheart. You fed me false information about your company's finances." "Did I? I don't recall having any conversations with you about finances. Jennifer told me. Jennifer told you what I wanted her to tell you. Amazing how people will believe gossip when it confirms what they want to hear." Silence on the other end of the line. Greg's clients didn't believe his story, I continued. "Turns out 15 years of honest business relationships are worth more than forged financial statements. You can't prove we forged anything." "Actually, I can. Greg showed the fake statements to 3 different clients. They all kept copies. And those statements could only have been created using financial data that you stole from our computer system." "That's not theft. I had legitimate access." You had emergency access for legitimate business purposes. Using it to steal data for a competitor is computer fraud and a federal crime. I could hear Beth and Greg talking in the background, but couldn't make out the words. "This isn't over," Beth said finally. "You're right. But it's about to be." The FBI takes computer fraud seriously, especially when it involves corporate espionage and interstate commerce. Agent Sarah Martinez was younger than I'd expected, but she had the focused intensity of someone who'd built her career on complex financial crimes. "Mr. Parrish, walk me through the timeline of your wife's access to company financial records." We were sitting in the Parrish Electrical conference room with my lawyer, my accountant, and enough documentation to fill a small library. Agent Martinez had been taking notes for 2 hours. Beth had emergency access codes for 2 years, but according to our audit, she never used them until 6 months ago. That's when the unauthorized access started. Coinciding with the beginning of her relationship with Greg Stanton? Exactly. The access logs show she downloaded financial records, client lists, project schedules, and bid information. All of it was passed to Stanton and Associates. Agent Martinez reviewed the computer logs Tom had prepared. "This is pretty clear evidence of corporate espionage. What about the forged financial statements?" Richard handed her a folder. Mr. Stanton showed these fake statements to 3 different clients, claiming Parrish Electrical was financially unstable. The statements contained confidential information that could only have been obtained through unauthorized access. And you have witnesses? All 3 clients will testify that Mr. Stanton made false representations about Parrish Electrical's financial condition. Agent Martinez closed her notebook. "I'll need to interview Mrs. Parrish and Mr. Stanton. In the meantime, don't discuss this investigation with anyone." After she left, I sat in my office reviewing the past week's events. The FBI investigation would take months to resolve, but it had already accomplished one important goal. Greg was now too busy dealing with federal agents to continue sabotaging my business. The licensing board complaint was still pending, but our documentation had raised serious questions about the authenticity of the evidence. When investigators compared the photographs in the complaint to the actual project sites, they found multiple inconsistencies. My phone rang. Jim Morrison, sounding excited. "Jay, you need to see the news. Channel 8 is running a story about Stanton and Associates." I turned on the television in time to catch the lead story. Jessica Chen, the same reporter who'd covered the Morrison site vandalism, was standing in front of Greg's office building. Federal agents raided the offices of Stanton and Associates this morning as part of an ongoing investigation into corporate espionage and computer fraud. Sources close to the investigation say the company is accused of stealing confidential business information from competitors. The footage showed FBI agents carrying boxes of documents out of Greg's building. Greg himself was visible in the background, talking animatedly with a man in an expensive suit, who was probably his lawyer. The investigation centers around allegations that Stanton and Associates obtained confidential financial and client information from Parrish Electrical, a competing contractor, through unauthorized computer access. My phone started ringing immediately. Clients, suppliers, and competitors all wanted to know what was happening. I referred everyone to my lawyer and focused on running my business. But the best call came from an unexpected source, Mark Riley, Greg's project manager and right-hand man. "Mr. Parrish, I wonder if we could meet. I have information you might find interesting." We met at a diner on the outskirts of town, away from anyone who might recognize us. Mark was nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder and speaking in low tones. "I've worked for Greg for 8 years, he began. "I thought I knew him, but the past 6 months have been different. He's been obsessed with destroying your company." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of being part of something dirty, and because I think Greg's about to throw me under the bus to save himself." Mark pulled out a flash drive. "This contains copies of every email, document, and recording related to Greg's campaign against Parrish Electrical, including conversations with your wife." I stared at the flash drive. "Why would you record your boss?" "Greg's been unstable lately, paranoid, making threats, talking about framing people for crimes they didn't commit. I started documenting everything to protect myself." "What kind of threats?" "He's planning to claim that the Morrison site vandalism was actually done by Parrish Electrical employees to create a false flag operation. He's got fake witnesses lined up to testify that they saw your guys damaging their own work." "That's insane. Greg's desperate. The FBI raid spooked him, and he knows his business is finished." He's willing to do anything to take you down with him. Mark slid the flash drive across the table. There's also recordings of phone calls between Greg and your wife. They're planning to claim you've been physically harmful and that Beth was afraid for her safety. I've never laid a hand on her. I know, but they've got medical records from an urgent care clinic where Beth was treated for bruises last month. She's going to claim you caused them. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. How do you know she didn't get those bruises from me? Because the recordings include Greg coaching her on how to create believable injuries. They used makeup and staged photographs. Mark stood up to leave, then turned back. Mr. Parrish, Greg Stanton is not a stable person. He's convinced himself that destroying you is the only way to save his own company. Be careful. After Mark left, I sat in my truck reviewing the contents of the flash drive on my laptop. Hours of recorded conversations, hundreds of emails, and detailed documentation of a conspiracy that went far beyond corporate espionage. Greg and Beth had planned every aspect of their campaign. The OSHA complaints, the licensing board investigation, the client meetings, the fake financial statements, and now false allegations of domestic misuse. But they'd made a critical error. They'd trusted Mark Riley, and Mark had documented everything. I called Agent Martinez. I have new evidence in the Stanton case. How quickly can you meet? I'm 20 minutes away. Good. You're going to want to see this. The domestic misuse allegations hit the news 3 days later. Beth held a press conference outside the courthouse, flanked by Greg and a victim's rights attorney I didn't recognize. I lived in fear for 2 years, Beth told the cameras, her voice shaking with what appeared to be genuine emotion. Jay Parrish used his physical size and violent temper to control and intimidate me. When I finally found the courage to leave, he retaliated by having me investigated by the FBI. She was good. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her myself. The victim's rights attorney, a woman named Patricia Valdez, stepped forward to address the media. Mrs. Parrish has medical documentation of injuries consistent with domestic violence. She's filing for a protective order and requesting that Mr. Parrish be prohibited from contacting her or interfering with her employment. Greg stood behind them, playing the role of supportive friend and employer. He looked appropriately somber and concerned, exactly what you'd expect from someone helping a misuse victim. The performance was flawless. It was also completely fabricated. I watched the press conference from my lawyer's office, where Richard and I were preparing our response. They're good, Richard admitted. If we didn't have Mark's recordings, this would be a serious problem. Can we use the recordings? Absolutely. They show clear evidence of conspiracy to file false reports, but we need to be strategic about when and how we reveal them. What do you mean? If we release the recordings immediately, it looks like we're trying to discredit and misuse victim. We need to let them commit to their story first, then expose the fraud. My phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters, clients, and employees. Parrish Electrical's reputation was taking a beating, and several clients were expressing concerns about continuing their projects. But I also received some unexpected support. Mrs. Howland called to offer her testimony about Beth's behavior during the marriage. That woman was never afraid of you, she said bluntly. I saw her screaming at you in your own driveway more than once. If anyone was hurt in that relationship, it was you. Jim Morrison called to express his support. Jay, I've known you for 10 years. You're not capable of what they're claiming. Even some of Greg's former employees reached out to offer information. Apparently, Mark Riley wasn't the only person who'd grown uncomfortable with Greg's increasingly erratic behavior. The protective order hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Beth's attorney had requested an emergency hearing, claiming she was in immediate danger. Richard and I spent the weekend preparing our defense. We had Mark's recordings, Mrs. Howland's testimony, and medical experts who could testify about the staged nature of Beth's injuries. But our best evidence came from an unexpected source: Beth herself. Agent Martinez called Sunday evening with news. We've been monitoring communications between Mrs. Parrish and Mr. Stanton as part of the corporate espionage investigation. They've been discussing the protective order case, and they made some interesting admissions. What kind of admissions? The kind that prove they fabricated the misuse allegations. I can't give you details, but I can tell you that your wife and Mr. Stanton have been very careless about what they discuss over the phone. Monday morning, the courthouse was packed with reporters and spectators. The domestic misuse story had captured public attention, and everyone wanted to see how it would play out. Beth took the witness stand looking appropriately vulnerable. She wore a conservative dress and minimal makeup, projecting the image of a battered woman seeking protection. Her testimony was detailed and convincing. She described years of escalating misuse, including specific incidents with dates and locations. She showed photographs of bruises and medical records documenting her injuries. Patricia Valdez, her attorney, walked her through each incident methodically. By the time Beth finished testifying, half the courtroom was looking at me like I was a monster. Then it was our turn. Richard started with Mrs. Howland, who testified about Beth's aggressive behavior during the marriage. Then he called Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a forensic pathologist who specialized in domestic violence cases. Dr. Walsh, you've reviewed the medical records and photographs presented by Mrs. Parrish. What's your professional opinion about these injuries? The injuries are inconsistent with the alleged causes. The bruising patterns and coloration suggest they were created artificially, possibly with makeup or self-inflicted trauma. Can you explain what you mean by artificially created? The bruises show characteristics typical of theatrical makeup rather than actual physical trauma. The coloration is wrong. The edges are too defined, and there's no associated swelling or other signs of genuine injury. Patricia Valdez objected strenuously, but the judge allowed Dr. Walsh to continue her testimony. Then Richard played his ace in the hole. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce evidence that directly contradicts Mrs. Parrish's testimony. He handed the court reporter a transcript of Mark Riley's recordings. This is a recorded conversation between Mrs. Parrish and Mr. Greg Stanton discussing how to create believable fake injuries for this protective order hearing. The courtroom erupted. Patricia Valdez was on her feet objecting. Beth looked like she'd seen a ghost, and Greg was whispering urgently with his attorney. The judge called for order and reviewed the transcript. After 20 minutes, he looked up with a grim expression. I'm going to allow this evidence. Mr. Valdez, your client appears to have some explaining to do. Richard played the recording for the entire courtroom. Beth's voice was clearly audible, discussing makeup techniques for creating realistic bruises. Greg could be heard coaching her on how to make her testimony more convincing. The most damaging part came at the end of the recording. Beth, what if someone figures out the injuries are fake? Greg, they won't. And even if they do, it'll be too late. Jay's reputation will be destroyed, and that's all that matters. When the recording finished, the courtroom was silent. Beth sat at the plaintiff's table with tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of fear or sadness, they were tears of rage at being caught. The judge dismissed the protective order request and referred the case to the district attorney for investigation of perjury and filing false reports. But the real drama happened outside the courthouse. As we were leaving, Greg confronted me in the parking lot. He was furious, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. You think you've won? He shouted, loud enough for the lingering reporters to hear. I'll destroy you! I'll burn your company to the ground before I let you beat me! Greg, you should probably talk to your lawyer before making any more threats. Forget my lawyer and get lost. You're nothing but a small-time contractor who got lucky. I built a real business, and I'm not going to let some blue-collar nobody destroy it. The reporters were recording everything. Greg's public meltdown was going to be the lead story on every local news broadcast. You want to know the truth? Greg continued, his voice rising. I did sabotage your job sites. I did steal your client information. And I'd do it again because you don't deserve what you have. Richard grabbed my arm. Don't say anything. Let him talk. Greg was beyond caring about consequences. Beth was right about one thing. You are nothing. A nobody from nowhere who stumbled into success. But I'm going to take it all away from you, just like I took your wife. Actually, I said quietly, you're not going to take anything else from anyone. I pulled out my phone and showed Greg the screen. I'd been recording his entire rant. That's a confession to multiple felonies made in front of a dozen witnesses and recorded on video. Your lawyer is going to love this. Greg stared at the phone, finally realizing what he'd done. You can't use that. I didn't consent to being recorded. New York is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm part of. The color drained from Greg's face. In his rage, he'd just confessed to corporate espionage, vandalism, and conspiracy, on camera, in front of reporters. Greg, I said loud enough for everyone to hear, you always wanted to be the star of the show. Congratulations. You just got your wish. As I walked away, I could hear Greg screaming at his lawyer, demanding to know how to fix this. But there was no fixing it. He'd destroyed himself with his own words. Beth was standing by her car, watching the scene with a mixture of horror and disbelief. When she saw me looking at her, she started to say something. I held up my hand to stop her. Don't. Whatever you're about to say, don't. You've already said enough. I got in my truck and drove back to Parish Electrical, where my employees were waiting to hear how the hearing had gone. Boss, Carl said as I walked into the office, please tell me we won. I looked around at the faces of people who depended on me to save their jobs and their company. We won. The celebration lasted until well after closing time. By the next morning, Greg's confession was viral on social media, and Stanton and Associates was finished. 3 clients canceled their contracts, the bonding company pulled their coverage, and 2 key employees quit. Beth was arrested the following week on charges of perjury, computer fraud, and conspiracy. She pled guilty and received 2 years probation in exchange for her cooperation in the federal case against Greg. Greg wasn't so lucky. The FBI had enough evidence to charge him with corporate espionage, computer fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other federal crimes. His confession in the courthouse parking lot was just icing on the cake. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to Parish Electrical for damages caused by his sabotage campaign. 6 months later, I bought Stanton and Associates assets at a bankruptcy auction for 20 cents on the dollar. Parish Electrical doubled in size overnight, and I became the largest electrical contractor in upstate New York. The best part? I hired Mark Riley as my new project manager. He turned out to be everything Greg wasn't. Honest, competent, and loyal. Beth moved back in with her parents after her arrest. I heard she was working as a waitress at a diner outside of town, but I never saw her again. The divorce was finalized without any drama. She had no leverage left to negotiate. Mrs. Howland still calls occasionally to update me on neighborhood gossip. She never liked Beth, and she takes great satisfaction in telling me about Beth's fall from grace. That woman got exactly what she deserved, she told me last week. Pride goes before a fall, and she had plenty of both. I kept the house, but renovated it completely. New kitchen, new electrical system, new everything. I wanted to erase every trace of the life I'd shared with Beth. The basement where this all started now houses my home office. I installed the best electrical system money can buy. No more blown fuses or power surges. Sometimes I sit down there late at night, working on project schedules or reviewing bids, and I think about that conversation with Beth in the kitchen. The moment she told me she'd been feeding information to Greg and planning to destroy my company. She thought she was so smart. Thought she'd married a blue-collar nobody who was too stupid to see what she was really doing. But she forgot something important. I didn't build Parish Electrical by being stupid. I built it by being smarter than people who underestimated me. Beth and Greg learned that lesson the hard way. Power's back on, and this time, I'm the one controlling the switch.